I want you to sit with me for a moment, not physically, but in your mind, in your spirit, wherever it is that you do your deepest thinking. Because what I'm about to share with you today is not something you're going to nod your head at and forget by tomorrow morning. This is something I need you to feel in your chest. This is something I need you to carry with you. The next time you walk into a room where somebody looks at you sideways, the next time somebody talks over you like your voice doesn't matter, the next time somebody treats you like you're beneath them, because it's going to happen. Let's not pretend it won't. Somewhere along this journey, maybe it's already happened this week, somebody is going to disrespect you. They're going to dismiss you. They're going to underestimate you. They're going to speak to you in a tone that makes your blood boil. In that moment, everything you've built inside of yourself, every ounce of discipline, every bit of character you've been quietly developing when nobody was watching, it's all going to be tested right there in that moment. Now, here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. The way people treat you is not primarily a statement about you. It's a statement about them. It's a mirror held up to their own wounds, their own insecurities, their own unresolved pain. Hurting people hurt people. Small people try to make themselves feel large by making others feel small. This is not new. This is not unique to your life. This has been happening since the beginning of human history. Brother against brother, kingdom against kingdom, one soul threatened by the light in another soul, and so it reaches for a way to dim that light. But here's the good news, and I want you to hold on to this. They cannot dim what they did not light. Your light was not given to you by them, and so it cannot be taken from you by them either. Only you can hand that over. Only you can make the mistake of believing that someone else's opinion of you is the final word on your worth. Picture a young man sitting in a meeting early in his career, sharing an idea he had poured weeks of thought into, only to have a senior voice in the room wave it away without so much as a glance, without a single question, as if the effort behind it counted for nothing. In that instant, he stood at a fork in the road that every one of us stands at more often than we'd like to admit. He'd let that dismissal define the rest of his week, replay it on the drive home, let it quietly poison his confidence for the next project. Or he could recognize it for exactly what it was, one person's carelessness in a single moment, not a verdict on his worth, not a final ruling on his future. That fork in the road is where I want to meet you today. So let's talk about how you handle it. Let's talk about how a person of substance, a person of purpose, is a person who is serious about the life they're building, how that person responds when disrespect shows up at their doorstep. The first thing you must master, and I mean truly master, is the discipline of your response. Not your reaction, your response. There is a world of difference between the two. A reaction is emotional, it is immediate, it is untrained, it is the animal in you taking the wheel. A response is chosen. A response is deliberate. A response says, I saw what you did, I felt what you said, and I am still in control of myself. Anyone can react, a child can react, an untrained mind reacts, but it takes a disciplined soul to respond. And listen to me carefully, the moment you let someone else's disrespect dictate your behavior, you have handed them the steering wheel of your life. You have said without words, you have more power over my emotions than I do. Is that really the message you want to send? Is that really the kind of life you want to live? One where any fool with a sharp tongue can hijack your peace, can hijack your focus, can hijack your entire day. I want you to understand something about power. Real power is quiet. Real power does not need to raise its voice. Real power does not need to prove itself to every person who doubts it. There is an old truth that says, the meek shall inherit the earth. And people mistake meekness for weakness, but that is a grave misunderstanding. Meekness is not weakness. Meekness is strength under control. It's a stallion that could trample you in an instant, but has been trained to walk gently beside you. That is what discipline does to your emotions. It doesn't remove your fire. It teaches your fire where to burn and where to stay contained. So when someone disrespects you and your blood starts to rise, your pride starts screaming at you to defend yourself, to put them in their place, to say something cutting back, that is exactly the moment to breathe. That is exactly the moment to pause. Because in that pause is where your character lives. In that pause is where you decide who you really are, separate from how you were just treated. Now, I'm not telling you to be a doormat. Don't misunderstand me. There's a very important difference between restraint and silence, between discipline and submission. Restraint says, I choose not to engage on your terms. It does not say, you have nothing to say, we're going to get to that. But before you open your mouth, before you decide how to handle the disrespect that's been thrown at you, you have to win the battle inside yourself first, because a person who is not in control of their own emotions cannot possibly command respect from anyone else. Self-mastery always precedes influence, always. You cannot lead others until you have learned to lead yourself. You certainly cannot demand respect from the world while you are being ruled by your own impulses. Think about the people you actually admire. Not the ones who make the most noise, not the ones who win arguments on comment sections and family group chats, but the ones whose presence changes the temperature of a room the moment they walk in. What do they have in common? Every single one of them has learned to hold their tongue when their tongue wanted to run wild. Every one of them has learned to let a moment pass without needing to have the last word. That is not weakness. That is one of the rarest and most valuable disciplines a human being can develop, and it is available to you starting today. In the very next conversation where someone tries to provoke you into losing yourself. Now let's move to something deeper, something that I believe is at the very root of most disrespect that people experience. And this is going to require some honesty on your part. I want you to ask yourself, what standard have you set for how people are allowed to treat you? Because here is a hard truth, and I say this with love, but I need to say it plainly. People will treat you exactly as poorly as you allow them to. Not because they're testing you maliciously in some calculated way, though sometimes they are, but because human beings, generally speaking, go as far as the door is open. If you leave the door open for disrespect, if you laugh it off, if you shrink, if you apologize for taking up space, if you make yourself smaller so that others feel more comfortable, you are teaching people how to treat you. You are, whether you realize it or not, writing the manual on your own mistreatment and handing it to everyone around you. So the second thing you must do is set the standard and set it clearly and set it early. This means you have to develop the courage to say, calmly and without apology, that's not how you're going to speak to me. Not with rage, not with a raised voice, but with the kind of firm, grounded clarity that comes from a person who knows their own worth. You don't need to shout to be taken seriously. In fact, the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most respected one. It's the person who speaks the least. This means every word who commands the room. Practice this. Practice saying what you mean without flinching, without softening it into nothing, without letting your voice trail off at the end like you're asking permission to be respected. We're not born to ask permission to be treated like a human being with dignity. That is not a privilege you have to earn from cruel people. That is a baseline. That is the floor, not the ceiling. And understand this, boundaries are not walls. A wall keeps everyone out. A boundary simply says, this is where you end and I begin, and I decide what crosses that line. Boundaries are an act of self-respect, not an act of aggression. You are not being unkind when you refuse to be spoken to like you're worthless. You are not being difficult when you walk away from a conversation that has turned into an attack on your character. You are simply refusing to participate in your own diminishment. And here's what I've noticed in my years of watching people, of studying success and studying failure, of studying those who rise and those who stay stuck. The people who command the most respect in this world are rarely the ones who chase it. They are the ones who set a standard, live by it consistently, and let people either rise to meet it or remove themselves from their life. You don't chase respect. You cultivate the kind of character that makes disrespect feel foolish and out of place the moment it's attempted. Now let's talk about the third way, and this one requires patience because it's a long game, not a short one. The third way to handle people who don't respect you is to let your work speak on your behalf. I want you to think about the loudest arguments you've ever heard in your life. The shouting matches, the insults traded back and forth, the attempts to win through volume and aggression. Did any of that ever actually change a mind? Did any of that ever actually earn genuine respect? Or did it simply end in exhaustion, in resentment, in two people walking away more entrenched in their positions than before? Words, when used as weapons in the heat of an emotional exchange, rarely build anything. But results are undeniable. Results don't argue. Results don't need to defend themselves. Results simply stand there in plain view and force even your harshest critics to reconsider. This is why I tell people, when someone doubts you, someone disrespects your ability, your intelligence, your potential, resist the urge to convince them with your mouth. Convince them with your life. Convince them with the quality of your work, the consistency of your discipline, growth that becomes undeniable over months and years of relentless effort. There is nothing more satisfying, nothing more silencing than watching a person who once dismissed you have to quietly witness what you've built while they were busy underestimating you. And I want to be clear, I'm not telling you to build your life as revenge against them. That's a trap. That's giving them power over your purpose. I'm telling you to build your life because it is who you were made to be. And if it happens to silence your critics along the way, let that be a byproduct, not the goal. Build because you have something to offer this world. Build because greatness was placed inside of you before anyone ever had the chance to doubt it. Think about every person you've ever admired, every leader, every entrepreneur, every artist, every person who left a mark on this world that outlasted their own lifetime. I promise you, every single one of them faced rooms full of people who did not respect them, who laughed at their ambitions, who told them they weren't good enough, smart enough, talented enough, disciplined enough. And I promise you this too, not one of those successful people won that battle by arguing their way into respect. They won it by outworking the doubt. They won it by showing up again and again and again, long after the critics had grown bored of watching, long after the doubters had moved on to doubt someone else. Consistency is the loudest rebuttal there is. When you show up day after day, refining your craft, sharpening your mind, building your character, disrespect eventually runs out of things to say. It has no evidence left to stand on. It becomes irrelevant in the face of undeniable proof. And understand something about time, because time is the one variable most people underestimate in this equation. Nobody's respect changes overnight. The doubt that took years to form does not dissolve after one good week or one lucky break. It dissolves slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the same way erosion reshapes a canyon. Not through a single dramatic event, but through relentless, patient pressure applied consistently over a long stretch of time. This means you have to be willing to keep showing up long after it feels pointless, long after the results seem invisible, long after you start wondering if anyone is even noticing the effort you're putting in. That is where most people quit, right before the proof becomes undeniable. Don't be most people. Keep laying brick after brick, season after season, and trust that the structure you're building will eventually be too tall, too solid, too obviously well-made for anyone to keep dismissing. Now, the fourth way, and this one is going to challenge you, because it requires you to look inward instead of outward. The fourth way to handle people who disrespect you is to examine whether you actually respect yourself. Because I have to tell you something that most people don't want to hear. Often, when we are deeply wounded by someone's disrespect, it's because some part of us already agreed with them. It's because some quiet, insecure voice inside of us has been whispering the same doubts long before that other person ever said a word out loud. If someone calls you lazy, and it doesn't bother you in the slightest because you know, without question, that you are disciplined and hardworking, their words fall off you like water off stone. But if someone calls you lazy and it cuts deep, if it lingers in your mind for days, if you find yourself replaying it over and over, that's worth investigating. Not because they were necessarily right, but because there's an unresolved wound there that needs your attention, not their apology. This is why self-respect has to be the foundation everything else is built on. You cannot expect the world to hand you a level of respect that you are not giving to yourself. If you talk down to yourself in the privacy of your own mind, if you let yourself slide on your commitments, if you settle for mediocrity and call it good enough, if you don't honor your own time, your own values, your own potential, you are, in a very real sense, training yourself to accept disrespect as normal. And people can sense that. Not consciously most of the time, but energetically. There is a certain posture, a certain presence that a person carries when they deeply respect themselves, and it changes how the room responds to them. It's not arrogance, it's not ego. It's quiet, unshakable self-honor. It says, I know who I am. I know what I'm worth. And no external opinion is going to shift that internal truth. So I need you to start there. Before you worry about how to respond to that difficult coworker, that dismissive family member, that partner who doesn't value your voice, I need you to ask yourself honestly, do I keep my word to myself? Do I follow through on the promises I make to my own goals? Do I speak to myself the way I would speak to someone I deeply respect? Or do I tear myself down in ways I would never allow someone else to do to me? Because here's the truth. You teach the world how to treat you first by how you treat yourself. Fix that relationship, strengthen that inner respect, and you will find that far fewer people even attempt to disrespect you in the first place. And the ones who still try, they'll find that their words simply don't land the way they used to, because you are no longer standing on shaky ground. You are standing on the solid foundation of a person who knows exactly who they are. I want you to think, honestly, about the small promises you've broken to yourself over the years. The workout you skipped and told yourself you'd make up tomorrow, and then never did. The project you abandoned halfway through because it got hard. The boundary you swore you'd hold and then quietly let slide the very next time someone pushed against it. Each one of those broken promises might feel small and forgettable on its own, but stacked together, over months and years, they build a quiet, corrosive belief system inside of you, a belief that your word doesn't really mean anything, even to yourself. And if your own word doesn't mean anything to you, how can you expect it to mean something to the world? Self-respect is not built in the big, dramatic moments. It's built in the small, unglamorous decisions nobody else ever sees. The early alarm you actually get up for, the hard conversation you actually have, instead of avoiding, the commitment you honor, even when your motivation has long since packed up and left the building. Now let's talk about the fifth and final way, and I saved this one for last, because it might be the hardest one to accept, but it is perhaps the most freeing truth I can offer you today. The fifth way to handle people who don't respect you is to release your need for their approval entirely. I want you to really let that sink in. Not just tolerate their disrespect, not just manage it with discipline and boundaries and self-respect, but to genuinely release the need for their validation altogether, to stop assigning them the power to determine your value in the first place. Here's what I've come to understand, and I say this with the weight of having watched countless people waste entire decades of their life, chasing the approval of people who were never going to give it freely, no matter what they achieved. You could climb every mountain they said you couldn't climb. You could build the very empire they laughed at when it was just an idea in your mind. You could become everything they once doubted. And some of them will still find a way to withhold their respect because their disrespect was never really about you to begin with. It was about their own limitations, their own fears, their own smallness that they haven't had the courage to confront. And if you spend your life waiting for people like that to finally validate you, you will die waiting. You will hand over the one life you've been given, chasing applause from people who were never going to clap. This is where purpose has to enter the conversation, because purpose is what frees you from the prison of needing everyone's approval. When you know why you're here, when you understand the assignment on your life, the gifts you were given to steward, the impact you were meant to have, the opinions of small-minded people start to shrink in significance. They become background noise instead of headline news. You stop asking, what do they think of me? And you start asking, am I being faithful to what I was called to do? That question changes everything. That question puts you back in the driver's seat of your own life. Because I promise you this, there is something greater than the approval of people, and it's alignment with your purpose. There's a peace that surpasses understanding when you know you are walking in integrity with who you were made to be, regardless of who claps for you and who doesn't. That peace cannot be manufactured by human praise, and it cannot be destroyed by human criticism either. Consider how much of your energy right now, today, is being spent trying to earn the respect of someone who has already shown you they're not capable of giving it freely. Consider how many hours you've spent rehearsing conversations in your head, trying to find the perfect words that would finally make them see your value, finally make them understand, finally make them apologize. That energy is not free. It is being pulled directly from the account of your purpose, your creativity, your peace, your family, your future. Every minute you spend trying to convince someone who has already made up their mind is a minute stolen from the life you were actually called to build. I am not telling you to stop caring about people. I am telling you to stop outsourcing your sense of worth to people who were never qualified to assign it in the first place. And I want to speak to something deeper here, something that goes beyond strategy and mindset into the realm of faith. Because I believe, and I've seen it play out in life after life, that there is a design and a purpose stitched into every single person walking this earth, including you. You were not created to be small. You were not created to shrink under the weight of someone else's ignorance or insecurity. There's an old wisdom that speaks about being fearfully and wonderfully made, about being knit together with intention, about being formed with a purpose that predates every insult anyone has ever thrown your way. If you believe that even a little, even as a seed of faith buried somewhere in your chest, then you have to understand no person on this earth has the authority to override what was placed in you before they ever met you. Their disrespect does not get the final say. Their opinion is not the verdict. You were designed with intention, and that design does not require anyone else's ratification to be true. There is a season for everything under the sun, a season for planting and a season for harvest, a season for struggle and a season for reward. Right now, you might be living through the season where the seeds you're planting seem invisible, where the disrespect feels louder than the progress, where it seems like the people who doubt you are winning the argument simply because they're winning the moment. But seasons change. They always have, and they always will. The farmer who plants in the cold, hard ground of winter does not judge his harvest by how the field looks in January. He trusts the process. He trusts the unseen work happening beneath the surface, in the dark, where no one can see it yet. Your character is being formed the same way right now. In the dark, in the moments nobody applauds. In the seasons where disrespect is loud and results are still quiet. Trust that process. The harvest is coming for those who don't quit in the winter. So when disrespect comes, and it will come again and again in different forms, from different people at different seasons of your life, I want you to remember these things. Master your response before you ever open your mouth. Set the standard for how you allow yourself to be treated, and hold that line without apology. Let your work, your consistency, your undeniable growth speak louder than any insult ever could. Examine your own self-respect, because the world often mirrors back the value you privately assign yourself. And finally, release your need for approval from people who were never assigned the authority to define you in the first place. None of this is easy. I'm not going to stand here and pretend that discipline is comfortable, because it isn't. Comfort and growth have never lived in the same house. Every time you choose restraint over reaction, every time you hold your standard instead of caving to keep the peace, every time you keep building instead of arguing, every time you look inward instead of outward, every time you release the grip of someone else's opinion, you are choosing the harder path. But it is the path that leads somewhere. It is the path that builds a person of substance, a person of unshakable character, a person who cannot be rattled by every passing insult or dismissive glance. And that person, the one you're becoming through this discipline, that person commands respect not because they demanded it, but because they simply became undeniable. You were not put on this earth to be small so that other people could feel big. You were not put here to shrink your voice, dim your light, or apologize for taking up space in rooms you were destined to walk into. Somewhere inside you is a strength that has not yet been fully tested, a resolve that has not yet been fully awakened, a version of you that no longer flinches when disrespect walks through the door. Because that version of you knows exactly who they are, exactly what they're building, and exactly where they're headed. That version of you is not a fantasy. That version of you is available to you right now, in this moment, the very next time someone tries to make you feel small. So stand up straight. Set your standard. Do your work in silence and let it roar when it's finished. Respect yourself enough that the opinions of small people lose their grip on your peace. And walk forward today as the person you were always meant to become, unshaken, unbothered by noise that was never worth your attention, and utterly unstoppable in the pursuit of everything you were put on this earth to do. Nobody's disrespect gets to write the story of your life. Only you hold that pen. So pick it up and write something extraordinary. Good luck to you. God bless you on this journey, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time with me today.